Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking Baseball, coming to you on WWBG 1470 AM, WTOB 980 AM, 96.7 FM. We're also on TobaccoSportsRadio.com and several different social media platforms such as Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and if you have any more out there, we're probably on them as well. It is a great day here, a great Friday, and I'll tell you what, things are kicking up in Major League Baseball, and believe it or not, we picked up a free agent here on Frankly Speaking Baseball as well. It is my great honor. I know you love it, and I know I love it, and I'm looking forward to what looks to be an unbelievable second half of the season.
It's been wild, and I kind of wrote about it on SportsCarolinaMonthly.com, how topsy-turvy the standings are right now. Yeah, the Marlins are on a little bit of a slide, but they came out of the break the second-best team in the AL behind the Braves. You look at teams like the Diamondbacks, the Rangers, teams that coming into the year you wouldn't normally have. It's been the teams that have been able to utilize a lot of the rule change as well. You look at the Diamondbacks as well as they run the bases. You look at the Rangers, as much as they've been able to hit for power, just swept the Tampa Bay Rays. It's the teams that have been able to find that mix that have been able to be successful.
Yeah, and I want to go ahead and I want to start out in the American League East because I cannot believe I'm saying this. What are we? I guess right past the halfway of July, let's call it. We're in the second part of the season, and I don't know if this sounds right to you, but the Baltimore Orioles are in first place in the AL East. Remember, the Rays started off with a 13-0 record. Baltimore with this young team, Brett, and I mean youngsters. I mean, you look at this team, and this is a team not just current, but also for the next couple of years that are going to be very, very competitive.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, if anything, I think the O's right now are a year ahead of schedule when you look at where things stand for them organizationally. But you look at the talent that's on that roster right now, it's not really a surprise that they're as good as they are. We knew they had the pitching coming into the season. We knew they had a deep bullpen. We knew they had a pretty solid starting rotation, but offensively up and down the lineup, just contributions from everybody. Adley Rutschman, Cedric Mullins, a Greensboro product. He's been hitting the cover off the ball like he has the past couple of years. Mountcastle, everybody in an Orioles uniform has been stepping up, and they've had the pitching to back it up. It's an Islanders kind of scenario right now at Camden Yards.
You know, and you talk about the pitching, of course, Felix Bautista with that bullpen of Cano and Bowman. I mean, Bautista 4-1, 25 saves. And then before we get to the offense part of this team, you look at the pitching staff, and everybody seems to have a winning record, but there's not a big name on this starting pitching staff. You got Dean Kramer, 10-4, Tyler Wells, 7-5. Kyler Gibson, the only guy over 30 years old at the age of 35, 9-6. And then how about I believe it's Brandbush, 6-4. When you talk about the foundation of a pitching staff and a young pitching staff, you know, maybe one more solid veteran to go before the trade deadline? Or what do you think? I mean, what does this team need, in your opinion, to keep battling with the Rays? Or are they set the way they are?
I wouldn't say they're set. I think you make a good point right there. Kyle Gibson is a good veteran presence to have to kind of help mold that young rotation, as talented as it is. The important thing And you've got to have an ace. Look at the Phillies last. They won that best of 3 wild card series because they had 2 aces. It was Cardinals last year. I don't know what the market's going to look like even a week and a half out right now. We are hearing names being thrown out, but Shane Bieber, he's hurt. So we don't know what's going to happen with him. You've got Giolito and Dylan Cease. The White Sox may go full sell mode. The Cardinals are shopping Jack Flaherty and Jordan Montgomery. The Mariners have thrown Logan Gilbert's name out there in exchange for outfield help, but none of those names really jump off the page as a guy you would go out and get, as in when the Brewers went out and got CC Sabathia at the deadline. There's just not one of those guys on the market right now that's a top-of-the-line starter, and I feel like that would be the difference maker for both.
Yeah, and you look at this offense, and you go from 1 through 9. This team looks like it's okay to me. You got Rushman. O'Hearn has had an unbelievable year. I'm a big Gunnar Henderson fan. I think the more time he plays, and he's starting to heat up right now, as we've seen the past couple. And Hicks, do you think this team, from a lineup standpoint, is pretty okay right now?
I think from a lineup standpoint, absolutely. And this is a different look at the ballpark they play in now in terms of in years past. It's always been a ballpark, but right field, yeah, hitter friendly. When you go from center on to the left, not very hitter friendly since they moved that wall back and heightened it. But this is a team that 1 through 9 right now, Larry, they don't give away at bats. They grind out at bats. And for young guys like Gunnar Henderson having just come up, being a top prospect, Adley Rutschman being the highest regarded prospect in baseball to do what he's done, you have guys in other parts of the order. You have guys like O'Hearn. You have guys like Mullins and Mountcastle and Santander that are known for grinding out at bats. And I think the most underrated in-season acquisition in baseball is Aaron Hicks. He needed a fresh start. He was getting booed out of Yankee Stadium at the time he was in the lineup, and now he goes to Camden Yards, and he brings that Yankee pedigree with him, and you can just see the spark that it has given the lineup when he's in it in terms of the mentality of it. Every single at-bat is a war for the opposing pitching staff.
You know, we move over to the Rays, who started out the season. Actually, this is the first time since day one that the Rays are not in first place this year. They're 3-11 in the month of July, and you were talking about grinding out hits with the Baltimore Orioles. Well, in the first half of the season, or maybe the first 3/4 of the first half, if you want to put it that, the Rays were getting hits all the time, grinding out hits. They had Yandy Diaz, Rosarino, Wando Franco, all these guys that are capable of grinding out hits. But it seems like the last 30 days or so, this team is leaving way too many people on base. They're not getting that timely hit, and it's not the pitching. I mean, they got an unbelievable pitching staff as long as they stay healthy, with Glass now, Eflin, and McClanahan being 1, 2, 3. They got a great bullpen, but you can't have guys like Brandon Lau batting 207. Yes, he has 13 home runs. Taylor Walls hasn't panned out, batting 203. Yes, Series has 18 homers, but he's batting 217. This is just a matter of the Rays. Everything that was clicking at the beginning seems to not be clicking now. Do you see this team battling back and getting back where they need to be? And in your opinion, if anything, do they maybe need another right-handed power hitter if there's one available at the trade deadline?
I think right-handed power would be the way to go at the deadline, but I think this team can battle back. This team is too talented, and you mentioned the pitching. It's not just a starting rotation. You and I both know how solid their bullpen has been and can be. It's been a little suspect of late, but these are situations that teams run into. That this is baseball, right? You're going to run into points in this 162-game marathon where one week you're hitting the cover off the ball, you're 12 for 20 with runners in scoring position, and then the next week you're 1 for 29 with runners in scoring position, and you can't get that timely hit. That's where the Tampa Bay Rays are right now. I think a right-handed power bat would benefit, but that's also dependent upon guys like Brandon Lau, Yandy Diaz, Wander Franco hitting like they're supposed to. We know how complete this lineup is. We saw it through April and May, and now they kind of hit that swoon in June, and it's kind of continued on through July. They have the pitching to get them through. It's a matter of really the bottom third of the order, I think, for the Rays getting the job done. It's 1 through 5 and 6 that are carrying the load right now. It's got to be 7, 9 that find ways to come through.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And you look at the AL East, the only division in all of Major League Baseball with every team over 500 mark. You know, it's easily said that 4 teams from this division could actually make the playoffs. But in my opinion, and I know we might disagree on this, I think the Yankees are done. The Yankees, yes, Aaron Judge. But besides Aaron Judge, Torres, second baseman, he is the only other player on this team batting over 250. Nobody but Judge and him, maybe Rizzo when he's not hurt, hits the ball. That pitching is terrible. I see this could be the year the Yankees don't make the playoffs.
Larry, I'm with, and you hit the nail on the head. It's pitching. They have the offense. It's not playing up to par right now, but when you have an offense with the talent that they have, granted, yes, Aaron Judge has been hurt for a lot of the year, so has Rizzo, but it's not just those guys. There's Higashioka, Gleyber Torres. Guys are supposed to pick up the slack in that lineup, and it's just not being done. I heard a lot of people give flack to Major League Baseball for giving Shohei Ohtani and Domingo Germán co-AL Player of the Week a couple weeks ago when Domingo Germán threw his perfect game. Larry, he had about a 12.5 ERA in his 2 starts prior to the perfect game. He threw a perfect game against the worst team in baseball. I'm sorry, but that's called an anomaly. Pitching overall for this team has been abysmal. Yes, they haven't had Carlos Rodon.
Division, you got Minnesota and Cleveland. Looks like the 2 teams that are going to battle it out. Probably, in my opinion, the worst division in all of Major League Baseball is the Central. But the one thing, and you mentioned it, that wins championships is pitching and defense. And I got to say right now, if you're comparing Minnesota to Cleveland, I definitely have to give Minnesota the edge balance of the season.
Absolutely. And the one name you circle when you look at them is Sonny Gray. He's got postseason experience. Remember, he was with the Yankees a couple years ago when they made that run towards the end of the season. He's got postseason experience with Cincinnati a few years ago as well. So he not only brings that veteran presence, but you've got him. You've got Pablo Lopez, who pitched really important games in the WBC back in March. So you've got guys that bring pedigree and eat innings, and those are 2 important things.
As we move over to the West, I don't think there's a more well-balanced team. You could argue the Atlanta Braves, which we'll talk about a little bit later, than the Texas Rangers in all of baseball. You talk pitching, even without DeGrom. This team is unbelievable with a capital U. And then you talk about the offense, you got Josh Jung on this team who's having just a tremendous year. I think one of the biggest acquisitions this team's made in the last couple of years is probably picking up Nate Lowe from the Tampa Bay Rays when they had that opportunity, who's having a phenomenal season as well. And it goes on and on. Talk about a lineup 1 through 9. I think this is the most well-balanced team and the team to watch out for the rest of the way.
I mean, there's a lot of people you didn't name on that list that are contributing big time. Jonah Heim, the catcher. switch hitting catcher. Mitch Garver basically, not because of his defense or his offense, but just because they need to get both of them in the lineup. Mitch Garver came into the year as the starting catcher. He's now somewhat been booted to the designated Adolis Garcia, who the Cardinals let go for nothing. He's been hitting the cover off the ball the past couple of years. He's contributing big time. Corey Seager, Bruce Bochy being brought in was really to give Corey Seager a bit of a boost, because they went out and they spent all this money in free agency, but prior to that, they had mainly analytically focused managers. They went out and got probably the best manager on the market, 1, 2, 3 World Series with the Giants, a guy that brings pedigree, experience, old school, old-fashioned baseball guy. And the way you see the Rangers play every night, it's old school, just with a lot more pop than you would see teams maybe back in the day score with.
Yeah, and we can't forget Marcus Semien, a name neither of us had mentioned as well. He's having a terrific season. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. I'm being told to shut up by my producer that it's time for a station break. So let's go ahead, take a break, and when we come back, we're going to have former Major League Baseball player Reid Nichols, who played with the Boston Red Sox in the early 80s, the Chicago White Sox. Let's go ahead, take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Father Time is undefeated. It's going to hit Tom Brady eventually, too. It might be this year. Hopefully it's this year.
And Matt LaFleur went to both of them and said, hey, remember that play you drew up on notebook paper on Thursday? Yeah, run it now.
Like, that's the thing that's kind of tripping me up here. We've been clowning Kyrie Irving and his behavior for the past 5 years. I feel like I just got a point, like on a show or something.
3, 2, 1, Kerrsville, you've got state champions coming back home. The East Forsyth Eagles have just won Class 4A state championship.
On the line with NASCAR superstar Bubba Wallace. Bubba, what type of music are you listening to right now? Do you listen to anything particular to get you hyped before a race?
I'm in like the heavy metal stuff, like the screamo stuff, the stuff you can't understand. That's right up my alley.
Tie game at 41. Murph takes the snap. Fade. Right corner of the end zone for Timmons. He bobbled it and then honed it in the right corner of the end zone. Terrell Timmons Jr.
TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com, your home.
Welcome back to Frankly Speaking Baseball. I'm Larry Frank, and it's amazing because back in the early 80s to the mid 80s, I moved from New York to Boston, Massachusetts, got to see many, many games in Fenway Park. And at the same time, with my tenure in the Boston area, there was a baseball player that played pretty much the same years that I lived in Boston. He played for the Red Sox. And it is a great honor, great thrill, and most of all, a pleasure to bring in former outfielder for the Boston Red Sox, Chicago White Sox, and Montreal Expos. Let's have a big, frankly speaking, sports welcome to Reid Nichols. Reid, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to be on your program.
Reid, well, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule. The first question I have for you, Reid, and I'm sure you had this question a lot. You played in one of the most nostalgic ballparks of all time, being Fenway Park. And not only did you get to play center field or right field, you got to play left field as well. Talk about how difficult, if at all, it was to play with the Green Monster there in Fenway Park, and how did you get used to handling that wall?
Well, I don't think it was difficult. It was kind of fun, actually, because it was different. And any ball in the air usually would hit the wall in left field if it had any distance at all. So we kind of had a system down where whoever was Jim or Dwight, somebody going in and getting under the ball, make it look like you're catching it, and the other guy would play the ball off the wall. So, and it's usually a double. So we had a pretty good system down.
And, you just mentioned with some great outfielders, because Dewey Evans, you mentioned Jim Rice. But I wanted to ask you about your relationship, because you played, I think it was 3 years you got to play with one of the greatest left fielders to ever play that wall in Carl Yastrzemski. Talk about Carl Yastrzemski and you coming up, being young, being a rookie, and the relationship that you had with Carl.
Carl was a professional. I mean, he was all about baseball. No-nonsense guy. I'm there my second year. I think it was my second full season. And you know how the guys sit around the batting cage, you get their arms up on the batting cage watching whoever's hitting hit. And I'm having a pretty good round of batting practice. And Yaz goes, hey, nice hitting. And he looks over at one of the other players and says, what's his name?
Well, yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, I remember being upset. I don't remember the year, but it was early in your career. I think you were going up, battling for the position. I think it was center field at the time with Rick Miller. And one of you was supposed to start. And for some reason, and I know what the reason was, but during the offseason, they go out and they get Tony Armas to play center field, which didn't make sense at the time to me because you two were battling. How disappointed were you when here you are thinking you're battling for a center field position and they acquired Tony Armas?
Well, that's a pretty good story, actually. It's our last day of the season. I had a good year, and my locker is right by the door to get out of the clubhouse. And Ralph Houck, the manager, he's leaving. He walks by my locker. He stops and says, hey, kid, you're going to be my center fielder next year. And I go, okay, I better get on the stick. So I went to the Dominican to try to hone up on some skills. And I was there about a month, and I was hitting over 400 in the Dominican. And then I picked up a newspaper one day and said, Red Sox trade for Tony Armas. Houck says he's going to play center field. And I was like, for a week, I was numb. I was just nobody called me. Nobody said anything. Down there trying to, do the best I can do to be ready for the next season. And it was kind of crushed me at the time. So, yeah, that was a hard thing for me.
And not just a hard thing, but it's got to be hard when you have belief in a coach tells you something, a manager tells you something, and then they go against that as well.
Well, you know what? I was an executive after I left playing for 20 years. I was assistant to the GM with the Rangers and the Milwaukee Brewers, and I know how the system works. And looking back, I know that Ralph didn't have anything to do with it. Well, he might have had something, but he thought I could play. And when the owners and the upper management want to make decisions, the coaches are involved, but not as much as you think.
Right, and the ironic thing about that, Reed, we're talking to Reed Nichols, former Boston Red Sox, Chicago White Sox, and Montreal Expos outfielder. The ironic thing about that year is you ended up having a pretty good year.
Yeah. No, I was ready. I got ready from the season. I was as ready as I could be. And I did. I think I ended up DHing with Yaz a lot that year when he hit against the right-handed pitchers and I hit against left-handed pitchers. And it'd be like during we get down the seventh, eighth inning, Yaz is playing, and they bring a lefty to face, and then Ralph would look down at Yaz, and Yaz would either shake his head no or grab a bat and go to the bat. If he said no, all I'd heard was, Nichols, get a bat.
So you're traded to the White Sox, Rita, and I have to ask you the story because I grew up first in New York before moving to Boston, and the first thing I knew, I was born in 1966. So the first baseball player name I ever heard on Long Island in New York was Tom Seaver, Tom Seaver, Tom Seaver. That's all you heard back then, and you understand why. You got to play with Tom Seaver. Not only got to play with Tom Seaver, but you got to catch the last out on a fly ball by Don Baylor for Tom Seaver's 300th win. And I always wanted to ask an athlete this, whether it's catching the last out for a no-hitter or a historic moment like Tom Seaver 300th win, how much more pressure do you feel when that ball is in the air, your eyes are jumping up and down to catch that baseball?
Yeah. Well, honestly, that was kind of my forte in the outfield. If it was in the air, I was going to catch it. I had no problem with anything in the air. And I did. I tell you what, when that ball went up, I'm like, I better make sure I catch this thing. And then I don't think Tom knew it at the time, but I may not have given him the right ball back.
Well, there you go. Now, I have to ask you this, about 2 weeks away, Reed, from the trade deadline. You may never have it. I'm not sure. I don't think you ever traded at the trade deadline, but people don't realize it's not just the player that is being traded that is affected by the trades made at the trade deadline. Talk about the team and how you had players that are traded at the trade deadline and how it affects the other players on the team.
Well, you know what? If honestly, as a player, you try not to. You can control so many things that you cannot control. So you need to worry about things that you can control. So we never really, you'd hear rumors, but you just wait and see and play the game, and nothing changes really for your team and your teammates because you're trying to win and play as a team. Now,
before I get to a couple of questions, I want to ask you about being a farm director because there's some amazing things you've done on the when you were off the field as well. And I'll get to that in a minute, but I have to ask you a last question about a player that we've had many different former players on our show, from Red Sox players to Yankee players and so on and so on. And I had a couple of players on, and the guy I'm going to talk about in a moment, I grew up also loving Wade Boggs. Wade Boggs, when he came up, I think it was a little after you, from Pawtucket, was a great hitter. I mean, you can't say anything about his hitting. He could hit to all different parts of the field. It was a thing of beauty to watch Wade hit. But the one thing that a lot of his teammates had issues with is they said on the show that he was more interested about himself than the team, more interested about his stats than he was winning. Did you see that side of Wade Boggs, or is that something you didn't recognize?
Well, Wade and I signed at the same time, came through the minor leagues together, actually played almost every year together except I skipped AA and went to AAA, and then I played with Wade in AAA, and I was in the big leagues, I think before him, but obviously not as good a player as Wade. Wade was just super focused on his hitting. He had Ted Williams' science of hitting like the Bible, his dog-eared, and he'd come out, we'd have to sometimes wait for him in AAA where he'd be taking batting practice at 3 o'clock, and the rest of us wait for him to have a little extra BP. But there was a little bit of you could recognize that he was worried about his stats, and it worked. Whatever he did, it worked for him because he became a really good hitter. And that what you're saying, other players, yeah, there was some of that, but we all go through stuff.
Yeah, now I was doing some research and it fascinated me about you as a farm director. I think it was with the Rangers at the time, but I always said to myself, why don't front offices get more involved in teaching players more about etiquette and financial literacy when they come up to the major leagues? And then I'm doing some research on REID NICHOLS with the Rangers, and it fascinated me that when you were with the Rangers, you implemented, or I don't know, discovered or put together a program about etiquette and financial literacy. How did that all come about, and how did you come up with that idea?
Well, that wasn't the only two things that we did. We also hired actors, and we would bring in what we thought were our top prospects in the wintertime to the ballpark in Arlington. And we had a little stadium with a stage inside the ballpark, and actually hired an actor, let him hire about 5 other actors. So we had a total of 6. And I came up with 18 vignettes that were scenes from my past, or from things that had happened to me, or things that happened to other players that I saw, that the player, you could tell them every day, this is going to happen, you need to be careful, but until they experience it, they don't hear you. So I created a program so that we had these guys acting, and they would bring up 2 players, and all the rest of us would sit in the stands and watch, and they would go through all these vignettes, and then the player would be caught up, and maybe there was some drugs around, or maybe some girl had bad intentions, and he didn't know it, and he was blind to it. So actually tried to help them feel what it felt like. As a matter of fact, the program that I did put together was made the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and it said the title of the article was, if a pitcher lifts his pinky, he's probably a Texas Ranger. And that was just part of the program that we had, where we did teach them about how to handle their money, agents, and what's expected of them. And I told them, I said, you guys look at me like I'm paying you. I'm not paying you. So when you walk outside those doors, everybody that you talk to are the ones paying you. The fans are the ones that pay you. So you got to treat the fans like they should be treated. So that was the basis of the program, to get them ready for when they get to the big leagues, what's going to be expected of them.
Now, Reid, was this done because you experienced or saw someone who experienced some issues before? Or, I mean, what was the main reason for you even putting this in place?
Because I wanted to get the players ready. It was obvious. This stuff goes on all the time in baseball. I mean, it's all the behind-the-scenes stuff. And you don't know it's coming until when you're in the minor leagues, because you don't have the exposure to that many people. But when you're in the big leagues, there's a lot going on, and that when you walk into a room, a bar, a restaurant, everybody knows who you are. So you're a target. And I just try to get them ready for that, the best way to handle themselves.
Yeah, definitely an amazing program. You went on to the Milwaukee Brewers, similar role, and you went from having one of the worst farm systems to one of the top 10 farm systems in all of baseball. And it raises the question for me to ask you is, when you see teams today, like the Tampa Bay Rays, Cincinnati Reds recently, Baltimore Orioles, maybe the Indians and Diamondbacks you can throw in there, and they're being able to build strong teams through very successful farm systems, how fulfilling and amazing is that for you to see?
Well, I really enjoyed my time being an assistant to the GM, being a farm director. I worked for the same man for 25 years, Doug Melvin, and it really starts at the top and his leadership. And I always made it a point, usually scouting department and player development department butt heads, because the scouting department throws their players in and says, this guy can do that, and the player development gets them, and they say, well, this guy can't play, who signed this guy? So I tried to make sure that we were communicating, that we had scouts actually coming and coaching with us in the minor league system, so the scouts could pass on what they thought and what the other scouts had told them to our player development system. And it was always a good relationship. And I think really the backbone of a good organization is the scouting department, because they're the ones that get you the players. And then when you get good player development people that can get out of that player what the scouts saw, and it all comes together, you get better minor league organizations.
And it raises my last question. We're talking to Reid Nichols, former outfielder, Major League Baseball. The question arises with analytics and all the things we see. Not that we never had analytics when you played. It was just done different way. It wasn't as easily accessible. That's what I tell people, as in the 80s. But we still had books and binders and things like that. In today's game, Reid, and how much of the decision that's going on the field is made by the manager versus made by the general manager?
Well, I wish I could tell you that. I can't give you a good answer, because when I retired from the Brewers, that was kind of like the beginning of it when David Stern came in, and I saw it as a tool. When the numbers tell you certain things, you got to pay attention to it, but you also have to pay attention to the player development experience, and there's certain things numbers can't tell you. Player comes to the park and he's been having girlfriend problems,
right?
Or his mom's sick. You don't know that. The numbers are not going to tell you that. So it's a combination. It's a tool, but I think now it's become more of a religion than a tool.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Is it overrated?
I can't, honestly. Those people are smarter than I am. So.
Well, I hear you, buddy. Well, listen, my friend, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I could talk to you all day long about baseball, but I want to thank you so very much taking time out of your schedule to be on Frankly Speaking Baseball today.
Yeah, nice talking to you.
Thank you, Reid. That was the great Reid Nichols, former Boston Red Sox, Chicago White Sox, and Montreal Expo. Let's go ahead, take a break. Myself and Brett Wiseman will be right back after this message.
13 Daggers Tattoo Studio is looking for a new tattoo artist. Must be established with a strong portfolio and good work ethic. Stop by today at 13 Daggers across from Patriot Park on Fort Campbell Boulevard. Clarksville's ultimate tattoo studio. Tattoos, touch-ups, and consultations. See the artist's work online at 13daggerstattoo.com and get the custom experience you want with killer ink. Book today and get pricked by a pro. 13 Daggers Tattoo Studio. Working hard on the boulevard.
Father Time is undefeated. It's going to hit Tom Brady eventually, too. It might be this year.
Here at Tobacco Road Sports Radio, we ask the tough questions.
Hey, you got any left-handed footballs?
We're never afraid to tell you how we feel.
Come on, we look like the damn Bad News Bears.
We'll debate sports. We'll debate anything.
Man, you lying. You ain't never met Martin Luther King. Not the way out of me. Yes, he did. No, he didn't. Yes, he did. No, he did not.
No matter what, Tobacco Road Sports Radio has you covered.
I'm gonna come right back at him. Soldier.
You're listening to Tobacco Road Sports Radio.
We'll come back to you, Frankly Speaking Baseball, along with Brett Wiseman. I'm Larry Frank. And before we get into the National League, we're streaming on a lot of different social media platforms here. And I want to go ahead and recognize, I got it, my paper right here, 5 groups that watch us week in, week out, big fans of the show and big fans of helping us out, sharing the show. And first group on Facebook is Real Baseball Talk. Then we have Baseball Talk, BASports.com. We have Baseball Life, Baseball and Great Way of Life, and traditional baseball fans. And I'll tell you what, folks, don't just join one of those groups. Join all of them. They're all good at what they do, and they combine together. You can't find more up-to-date information than those groups. We love them, and we appreciate them. Brett, I want to get to the National League, and, I grew up at a time where I had the pleasure of watching the Cincinnati Reds infield of Tony Perez, Joe Morgan, Dave Concepcion, Pete Rose. And then on the west side, you had the Dodgers, who had an amazing infield of Steve Garvey, Ron Say, Davey Lopes, Bill Russell. But I'll tell you what, I don't know if I've ever seen a more well-balanced infield offensively and defensively than what I'm seeing on display in Atlanta right now. And this is a team that replaced Freddie Freeman, with Matt Olson, who has 30 home runs this year. They lost Swansbury to the Cubs. I mean, what is your take on this infield? And are they really that good?
I think they are, Larry, and I think they've proven it to this point, and I think they're destined and well set to keep proving it. You look at Austin Riley over there at third base, perennial all-star, having another fantastic season. Of course, Ozzie Albies at second, Matt Olson at first. You said it, 30 home runs, great defensive first baseman. But the real surprise for me in that infield's been Orlando Arcia, a guy that mainly was known as a platoon middle infielder, not really that great offensively. He's been swinging one heck of a hot bat this season, and that was the real question mark coming into the year, was the fall off. Do you gained a little bit defensively putting Arcia in there, but you lose Dansby Swanson's offensive production? That hasn't been the case. Arcia is actually outproduced what Dansby Swanson has done so far in a Chicago Cubs uniform to this point in the season. And I don't think we can talk about this infield without also coupling in the trade for Sean Murphy back in spring training.
Wow.
The stability that he has brought behind the plate, and his bat just being an added bonus to guys like Acuna and Riley and Olsen and Albies that bring so much to the table offensively. Throwing Sean Murphy into that lineup was just like throwing another log into a fire. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, and they have to have the best catching duo in all of baseball with now Travis Leonard, who they just extended. So it just tells you how important it is to keep them two together. But I'll tell you what, we talked about the Rangers earlier being well-balanced because of their pitching. This is another team. And, Spencer Strider, what can you say about this young kid and what he's done? You had him with veteran Charlie Morton. I mean, this is a good, well-balanced team as well. And it's one of the reasons I believe that Texas could be playing Atlanta in the World Series this year.
I totally agree with you. And Spencer Strider is a big reason why. He's been absolutely fantastic. Charlie Morton's been that big veteran arm. And bear in mind, this rotation is going on without who they really came into the season viewing as their ace, which was Mike Soroka. He's on the shelf for pretty much the remainder of the season. So this is a Braves rotation that's kind of had to piece things together behind Strider and Morton, but they've been able to do that and do it well.
Yeah, and we go down the NL East, and I'll tell you a team that worries me. It isn't the Mets, and we'll talk about the Mets and the demise. Actually, let's stay on the Mets a minute. Is this the team? I have never, ever, maybe San Diego, seen a team that has so much talent in every single place in this lineup, or almost every single place, have arms. Yes, they lost Diaz because of the ACL injury, but I have never seen a team underachieve as much as this New York Mets team has done this year.
The Mets and the Cardinals are the two biggest underachievers, shockingly, when you look at the rosters talent-wise. And the money that Steve Cohen has gone out and spent, not just in free agency, but in extending some of his core guys. Francisco Lindor got that massive contract extension. So did Max Scherzer. He brings in an aging Justin Verlander on a massive contract. And now there's talks that Justin Verlander may have pitched his final game in a Mets uniform. He may be out the door at the deadline. This team, Daniel Vogelbach, you look at as the DH, was a guy that coming into the year was thought was going to do a lot good. Up and down this lineup, this team is way too good and has way too big a payroll to be as mired in the cellar as they are right now. If the Washington Nationals weren't astronomically bad, the Mets would be in last place.
Yeah, no doubt about that. But I'll tell you what, I'm not worried about the Marlins in this division. This is something that's not new to the Marlins. They start out, They tease you for a little bit, and then they fall off the second half of the season. But the team that scares me is the same team that had an unbelievable second half of the season last year, and that's the Phillies. I mean, people, they kind of play under the radar in this division, but you talk about a lineup, and yes, Schwarber is not hitting for average, but he's definitely hitting for power. And you look around this lineup with Romuto and a couple of these other players, this is a pretty darn good lineup.
And the big reason they made the run that they did, not just in the second half last year, but their run through October, they wouldn't have even won the wild card series if it weren't for Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler being that 1-2 punch at the top of that rotation. That was just simply unstoppable. When you have two bona fide aces like that in your rotation, you have guys like Jose Alvarado in your bullpen, who's a flame-throwing left-hander. You couple that with guys in your lineup like the Schwarbers and the Real Mutos that you mentioned, but you've also got Rhys Hoskins, you've got Bryson Stott, and of course you have Bryce Harper. This is a complete team, as we saw last year, make a run to the World Series, but they kind of took them a little bit here earlier on the season to find their footing. But this is the time of year, both last year and even the year before in 2021, where we saw the Phillies really find themselves in the dog days of summer.
And, they got an unbelievable close-in Kimbrel, as we both know. But how much is Ron Walker this year? 11-3 for the Phillies.
Yeah, and like I said, you put him behind two bona fide aces in Wheeler and Nola. You throw those three guys out in a best-of-5 division series, I'm calling sweep right there, the way those three guys are pitching right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, they are just in sync. We move over to the Central, and I'll tell you what, I never seen anything special about Milwaukee except for one thing. They always find a way to win. I mean, they win. I mean, yes, they got Yelich on this team. They got a very good bullpen, which great teams do have. But I'll tell you what, if you're a fan and you love the underdog, I think the entire world is calling the Cincinnati Reds America's team right now. Talk about this Cincinnati Reds team. Do you think they have enough in the tank to get into the playoffs? A lot of young guys. I mean, lots of young guys. I mean, L.A. De La Cruz has took the nation by storm, but they got a lot of other guys that people, Steer on that team. I mean, we talked about Abbott, the pitcher that's gone. They got a lot of, we talked about the Orioles having a lot of young players. Here's another farm system that has done really, really well.
Tyler Stevenson behind the plate. You look at him. You look at Jonathan India kind of heading that infield. They get Joey Votto back. Almost you could equate it to making a trade for a veteran first baseman late in the year. You look at what the outfield production has been like, and of course you look at Ellie De La Cruz. I went to St. Louis last month to watch my Cardinals, and two of those games were against the Cincinnati Reds. And Larry, I mean to tell you, if no one has seen Ellie De La Cruz play in person, that is one guy that you have to pay $12 and go sit up in the upper deck just to see play in person. I saw the guy hit a 4-hopper to shortstop and beat it out by a step and a half. The guy runs like a gazelle. He's a switch hitter who very rarely hits the ball less than 98 miles an hour off his bat, if not more. He's a complete 5-tool player. You put him at the top of that lineup with India, with Votto, and then you have guys like Spencer Steer and Stevenson behind him. Yeah, there's a lot of relative unknowns towards the bottom of the order. Jake Fraley, the left-handed hitting outfielder, looks
and
like
Friedel.
He just walked out of a Friedel, T.J. Friedel. You said it right there, and they have the pitching as well. So yeah, they and the Brewers both are a lot of no names, so to speak, built around a couple of core veterans. You look at all these guys that are built around Jonathan India and Joey Votto. You have Christian Yelich and William Contreras basically as the
We'll come back.
Charlie Morton's been that big veteran arm, and bear in mind, this rotation is going on without who they really
something that's not new to the Marlins. They start out, they
two bona fide aces like that in your rotation. You have guys like Jose Alvarado in your bullpen, who's a flame-throwing left-hander. You couple that with guys in your lineup like the Schwarbers and the Realmutos that you mentioned, but you've also got Rhys Hoskins, you've got Bryson Stott, and of course you have Bryce Harper. This is a complete team, as we saw last year, make a run to the World Series, but they kind of took Tyler Stevenson behind the plate. You look at him, you look at Jonathan India kind of hitting that infield. They get Joey Votto back. Almost you could equate it to making a trade for a veteran first baseman late in the year. You look at what the outfield production has been like, and of course you look at Ellie De La Cruz. I went to St. Louis last month to watch my Cardinals, and two of those games were against the Cincinnati Reds. And Larry, I mean to tell you, if no one has seen Ellie De La Cruz play in person, that is one guy that you have to pay $12 and go sit up in the upper deck just to see play in person. I saw the guy hit a four-hopper to shortstop and beat it out by a step and a half. The guy runs like a gazelle. He's a switch hitter who very rarely hits the ball less than 98 miles an hour off his bat, if not more. He's a complete five-tool player. You put him at the top of that lineup with India, with Votto, and then you have guys like Spencer Steer and Stevenson behind him. Yeah, there's a lot of relative unknowns towards the bottom of the order. Jake Fraley, the left-handed hitting outfielder, looks
and
like he just walked out
Friedel.
of a Friedel, TJ Friedel. You said it right there, and they have the pitching as well. So yeah, they and the Brewers both are a lot of no names, so to speak, built around a couple of core veterans. You look at all these guys that are built around Jonathan India and Joey Votto. You have Christian Yelich and William Contreras basically as the veteran stalwarts of this Milwaukee Brewers team. The rest of it's just kind of pieced together top prospects that are playing really good baseball right now. They're finding ways to win because they have Devin Williams, one of the best closers in baseball, and they have a 1-2 punch at the top of their rotation with Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff.
Yeah, and I want to do this quickly so we can go over to the NL West because I don't want to break your heart too much. But the St. Louis Cardinals, you mentioned, like the Mets and the San Diego Padres. I mean, unbelievable. Probably the biggest underachievers of the year. I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that, but when you look at the overall spectrum of things, now this is a team, let's remember, that lost Pujols, who was hot as fire last year, okay? They lost Molina, two core guys of the team, not just on the field, but in the clubhouse as well. But I really was under the impression that Arenado and Goldschmidt can take over that reins. Is this an issue with there's no leadership on the team? What seems to be the major difference besides the not winning, of course, but in the difference between this year and last year?
The fact that you have manager and coaching staff that are nothing more than yes men to the front office. Mike Schilt was fired because he challenged the way John Mozeliak was looking at building the roster in the front office. John Mozeliak didn't like that Mike Schilt challenged him, so he fired him and hired the bench coach to be a yes man. He sends out a well-seasoned pitching coach last offseason in Mike Maddox, who's gone on to have success elsewhere, and brings in Dusty Blake. This is a coaching staff that is nothing more than pawns or Ponzi's to John Mozeliak and Bill DeWitt Jr. This is a front office that's been built on complacency for years. They know they're going to draw 3 million fans, whether the team stinks or not. But this is a team that's had 3 losing seasons since 1996. 3. They've also won 1 NLCS game since 2014. And now John Mozeliak comes out at the beginning of this past week, basically waves the white flag and says, we got to go get pitching. Basically acknowledging what we Cardinals fans and many in the media had called for all offseason was, please, for the love of God, find a pitcher. And now we have to go out and acquire it at the deadline, he says. and we have to go sign one in free agency before 2024. There's no other way to retool our rotation. Well, John Mozeliak waves the white flag, and what do the Cardinals do? They win 7 of their last 9 games, and now they have a pivotal stretch coming up, 11 games before the trade deadline, 8 of which are against the Cubs, who are directly ahead of them in the Central Division standings, which when you look at the Central, much like the AL Central, it's probably only going to be the team that wins that division that gets in.
Yeah, I don't think there's a question about that. And I'd be surprised if the St. Louis Cardinals don't have a new manager this time next year. That's just my opinion of it all. Let's go on to the West, okay? You know what? You cannot deny the offensive power that the LA Dodgers have. When Betts and Freeman, and it goes on and on and on. I can name every single player if I want to. But this is an unbelievable team. But in my belief, I think the Giants can win this division for the reason being is, first of all, they have an outstanding bullpen. No doubt about it, the Giants have. But right now, the Dodgers don't know from day to day who's going to be a starting pitcher on that team because everybody keeps getting hurt. Then I look at the lineup of the San Francisco Giants. I call them New York Mets number 2 because they got William Flores shining, Mike Conforto shining, J.D. Drew, all former New York Mets, my friend, that are really having unbelievable years. I'm a huge Mike Yastrzemski fan. Of course, I love his grandfather too when he played. But can you possibly see the San Francisco Giants overtaking the LA Dodgers, only a game behind in the West?
There's 2 teams you didn't mention. Of course, San Diego would be a disappointment at this point, but I don't think they're necessarily out of it either. There's one team you didn't mention that I think is going to end up winning the division, the Arizona Diamondbacks. When you look at what they have built this year, it's a mix of youthful exuberance and veteran experience. You've got Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who's really come on as a veteran. They bring in Longoria. He's having a bit of a career renaissance after coming over from those aforementioned San Francisco Giants. And then you look at the young talent that they have across the board. Jake McCarthy, Carson Kelly, perennial Rookie of the Year candidate Corbin Carroll, who is another one of those guys like an Ellie De La Cruz that just jumps off the scorecard night after night. And then you look at their pitching. Zach Gallen's the front runner right now for the NL Cy Young. This is a team that under Terry Lovella has found a way, as I said at the start of the show, to correctly utilize those rule changes. They're pitching well. They're not only hitting well, but they're finding ways to run the bases effectively. They're stealing bases at an 80% success rate. And it's thanks to guys like Corbin Carroll, Christian Walker, Jake McCarthy, all those guys.
Yeah, and, also pitching, Merrill Kelly's having.
Merrill Kelly right behind Zach Gallen, yeah. We've talked about it with some other teams. That 1-2 punch is so important.
Yep. I want to real quickly get your opinion on the wild cards before we close it out. Right now, if you look, and I know it's early, but it's time, buddy. It's time to start watching these things. Boston is, right now, the season ended today. It's Tampa Bay, Texas, and Minnesota. Tampa, Toronto, and Houston as the wild cards. Boston's 2.5 games out. Yankees 3 games out. And then you got the Angels and Seattle. Any surprises you see happening in the AL balance of the year?
I kind of see Toronto falling off, and I see the Angels with a bit of a second half renaissance. Okay. I think all this Shohei Ohtani trade talk, it's not going to come. He's not going anywhere. But I think so. I think the psychological aspect of it for the Angels clubhouse of when we get past August 1st and Shohei Ohtani's still there, I think it's going to be real galvanizing. And around that time is when Mike Trout is slated to come back from that broken hamate bone in his right hand. So that getting the best player in baseball, arguably, back right near the trade deadline is almost as good as making a trade. And there's guys up and down that lineup that are producing like they haven't in years. Reed Detmers had a fantastic June. You look at a guy like David Fletcher in the lineup as well. This is a team that's found ways to be successful when in past years they haven't.
All right, real quickly, National League. right now if the season ended today. And, we talked about the AL East maybe having 4 teams. Don't be surprised if the NL West could have 3 or 4 teams in the playoff picture as well. If it ended today, of course, the Dodgers would win the division. You would have San Francisco, Arizona, and Philadelphia in it. Miami's only a game back in the wild card. Cincinnati, 3 games. And then you have San Diego, 7.5. The Cubs and Mets, 8. If you really want to look and have something to dream about, the Cardinals only 10 games behind in the wild card. How do you see this? I mean, obviously, San Diego's going to make some type of run. I find it hard to believe that they won't. Anything that would surprise you here?
The only surprise would be if the Cardinals somehow make a 2011 type run. And they did this in 2021 also when they were 10.5 out of the wild card in the middle of August and rattled off 17 wins in a row. I don't know. We're getting a little early here, but they've won 7 of their last 9 coming out of the All-Star break after their GM waved the white flag and said, yeah, we're selling at the deadline. We're done. We're dead. Win 7 of your last 9 games, and now you've got 11 games left before the trade deadline. 3 against Arizona, who's leading the NL West, or tied for it, or close to it, I should say. They're up there. And then you've got the other 8 against the Chicago Cubs, who are a divisional foe. So those are, in hockey, you would view those as double-point games. The next 11 games for St. Louis, if they can go 7-4, 8-3, if they can go above 500 in this next stretch, that's going to determine for me whether or not they're able to make a run.
All right. Well, unfortunately, buddy, we could talk all day about baseball, but until next week, same time, same channels, same place, I'm Larry Frank. He's Brett Wiseman. Have a great week, and we'll see you once again next Friday on Frankly Speaking Baseball.